Welcome to our deep dive today. Um, we're going to be tackling, well, a topic that sometimes doesn't get talked about enough,
Yeah.
the impact of pornography on adolescents.
Yeah.
And let me just say right off the bat, we're not here to like point fingers or make anyone feel judged or anything.
Right.
It's really more about just kind of understanding what the research says because honestly, some of the stuff we found was well, it really gave me pause.
Yeah. It's definitely a conversation that can be tough to have.
Yeah.
People have strong feelings, but we're here to just kind of lay it all out there,
Yeah.
stick to the facts and hopefully give you guys some things to think about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's just dive right in, shall we? One of the things that really jumped out at me from the research was this whole idea of desensitization.
Hmm.
Have you encountered that in your work?
All the time.
Like the more someone sees this explicit content, the less impact it has on them over time.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how our brains are wired to kind of adapt to constant stimulation. Like think about it this way. If you hear a loud noise over and over, eventually you just kind of tune it out. It's like your brain just says, "Okay, that's the new normal."
Right, right.
And so now imagine that with something as intense
Hmm.
as sexual imagery, especially during adolescence when, everything's developing, the brain is really going through it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then they start to, the research suggests that that can lead them to seek out even more extreme content just to feel something.
Absolutely.
It's like they're chasing this high
Yeah.
that keeps getting harder and harder to reach.
It's that shock value, that initial whoa that they're chasing.
Yeah, yeah.
But the problem is that pursuit, it can really start to mess with their understanding of what a normal healthy relationship actually looks like. I often use this analogy of like people who watch a lot of action movies, after a while like real life just seems kind of boring.
Yeah.
And and it's not that different, right? Except we're talking about something as intimate and complex as sex and relationships.
It's like you're watching the highlight reel versus like the actual game. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
you're getting this very skewed perception of what it's really like.
Right. And one of the things that pornography often misses or just kind of glosses over is the emotional side of intimacy. The affection, the communication, the consent,
Right.
like all the things that actually make a relationship healthy and fulfilling.
Yeah, and it's not just about like what they're watching. It's about how it might be shaping their expectations of real life intimacy,
Yeah.
like their actual experiences.
Absolutely. And we saw this in one of the studies that we looked at, where adolescents who regularly watch pornography, they were actually less likely to intervene in a simulated sexual harassment scenario. It was like their ability to even recognize that something was wrong, that someone was being harmed, it was dulled.
Wow. So it's like it's affecting their judgment, their ability to read those situations.
Exactly. And that's what's really concerning is that, this desensitization, it's not just happening in a vacuum.
Right.
It can have real world consequences.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this potential for this distorted reality, especially when it comes to intimacy.
Right.
But it it doesn't stop there.
Right.
The research also talks about some serious mental health risks that are linked to excessive pornography use. We're talking anxiety, depression, low self-esteem.
And this is where it gets really, really tricky because adolescence is already such a delicate time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Emotionally, socially, they're already trying to figure out who they are, where they fit in.
Right, right.
And then you layer on top of that the shame, the guilt that can come with compulsive behaviors like excessive pornography use.
Right.
And it's a recipe for some really negative mental health outcomes.
Yeah, it's like they're already navigating a minefield, and then we hand them like a faulty compass.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's setting them up for a really difficult time.
Yeah. And we also can't forget the impact of isolation, right? Like if someone is spending hours every day immersed in this online world, it's going to affect their real life relationships. It's going to affect their ability to connect with people, to engage in meaningful ways.
Right, right.
And that in itself can be incredibly isolating.
It's like their whole world kind of starts to revolve around this online world that doesn't really exist.
Exactly, and it's not just their inner world that's being impacted either.
Hmm.
We also see from the research how excessive pornography use can really affect their relationships too.
Yeah.
Romantic relationships, sexual relationships, all of it.
So how does that play out, you think?
Well, we talked about how pornography often presents this very skewed, idealized version of what intimacy is supposed to be.
Right.
And so you have these young people, they're just starting to explore their own relationships, and they're coming in with these preconceived notions, these expectations that are frankly often unrealistic and sometimes even harmful.
Right. So it's almost like instead of approaching a relationship with like a sense of curiosity and openness, they're bringing all this baggage from this online world.
Absolutely. I would say it's kind of like learning to cook from watching a reality TV show.
Okay.
You might pick up a few tricks here and there,
Right.
but it doesn't really prepare you for the messiness, the nuances of an actual kitchen.
That's a good analogy.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And speaking of unrealistic expectations, I mean, the research also talks about how this can lead to performance anxiety,
Oh, absolutely.
body image issues.
Huge, yeah. Because let's face it, the way bodies are portrayed in pornography,
Yeah.
the way those encounters are filmed and edited, it's
Right.
all so far removed from reality.
Right. It's like comparing yourself to like someone's like highlight reel on social media or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just not a fair comparison.
And so, of course, you're going to end up feeling inadequate, and that dissatisfaction, it inevitably spills over into their relationships,
Right.
leads to insecurity, self-doubt, difficulty really connecting with a partner
Yeah.
on a genuine level.
Yeah, it's like it undermines their confidence, their sense of self-worth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this potential for distorted reality, mental health risks, and now relationship challenges. And then the research takes this even darker turn, I felt, when it starts talking about the normalization of harmful behaviors.
This is where it gets really concerning, especially when we're talking about young people being exposed to pornography that depicts violence, coercion, a lack of consent.
Right.
I mean, it's like it's rewiring their internal compass, making it harder for them to distinguish between what's healthy, what's respectful,
Right.
and what's actually harmful and unacceptable.
It's almost like desensitizing them to those red flags.
And it gets
Like they're seeing this stuff and they're thinking, "Oh, well this is normal. This is just what happens."
Yeah, and that can have some really, really devastating consequences, obviously.
Yeah. And what's scary is that for some young people, this is their primary source of sexual education.
I know. It's wild, isn't it?
The study actually mentions that a significant percentage of adolescents they report learning more about sex from pornography than from their parents, than from their teachers, healthcare providers.
It's almost like the default, in a lot of ways.
Right.
And the thing is, pornography, it's designed to entertain. It's
yeah.
not an educational tool.
Right.
It's not there to teach you about consent, about respect, about all the emotional complexities of intimacy.
Right.
It's just giving you this very narrow, often distorted view.
Yeah, so they're not only getting like a skewed view of what relationships are, they're also missing out on really crucial information
Exactly.
about healthy sexuality,
Yeah.
about decision making, all of that.
And then they're left to kind of figure it out on their own, with this completely inadequate, set of tools.
Right. It's like we're sending them out into the world with a broken compass, with a map to a place that doesn't even exist.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important point that the research highlights, which is the addictive potential of pornography.
Right. Because we can't ignore the fact that with the internet, with smartphones, access to this content is easier than ever before.
Oh yeah.
And for adolescents who, developmentally their brains are wired for impulsivity.
Right.
For risk taking, that easy access can be really, really dangerous.
Absolutely. It's like having this buffet of instant gratification
Right.
at your fingertips, 24/7.
24/7.
And while not everyone who watches pornography is going to become addicted, the research does show that excessive use, it can have a real impact on their development.
Right.
Emotionally, socially, even academically.
So it's not just about the content itself. It's also about like the amount of time and energy
Exactly.
that it's consuming.
It's like this black hole that can just suck you in.
Right.
And it can be really, really hard to break free.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about addiction. We're talking about these really serious potential consequences.
Right.
And then the research goes on to talk about the impact that this can have on sexual function itself.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And this is where, like, I have to admit, I had to like stop and reread this part because the study actually mentioned a link between excessive pornography use and erectile dysfunction in men.
Right.
And it just seems counterintuitive, you know?
It does. But, when you really think about it, the brain is wired to seek out novelty and reward, right?
Right.
And so if you're constantly relying on pornography for that arousal, it can actually make it harder for your brain to respond to real life partners, real life situations.
It's almost like it gets to like bored or something.
In a way, yeah. It's like your brain gets so used to that constant stimulation, that novelty that it's getting from pornography that real life just it can't compete. And it really highlights how important it is to understand how our brains work, how our habits, they don't just affect us, mentally or emotionally, they can have these real physical effects too.
Yeah. Wow. It's pretty amazing. A little bit unsettling how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections, we can't talk about this without talking about the impact on emotional development, right?
Absolutely. And this is something that I think often gets missed in these conversations.
Yeah.
We tend to focus so much on the physical aspects of sexuality.
Right.
But the emotional component is just as important.
Right.
If not more so.
Right, because intimacy is not just about the physical act.
Exactly.
It's about vulnerability, it's about trust, communication.
Right.
It's about a genuine connection.
It's about human connection.
Right. And so the concern is that if young people are primarily being exposed to a version of intimacy that's so heavily like skewed and often completely devoid of those elements,
Right.
it can make it really hard for them to develop healthy relationship patterns.
Exactly. Because they haven't had those models, those examples of what it really looks like,
Right.
To have a healthy, a fulfilling, a mutually respectful relationship.
It's almost like they're being handed a script for like a romantic comedy.
Okay.
But then they're being like thrust onto the stage of a real life relationship, and they have no idea how to improvise.
Exactly.
How to actually connect on a deeper level.
And that's why it's so important that we're having these conversations.
Yeah.
That we're talking to young people about relationships, about intimacy in a way that goes beyond the birds and the bees. That really gets into the emotional intelligence that it takes.
Right.
To build healthy connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, it's been it's not always an easy conversation to have.
No.
But I think the research really highlights just how important it is that we are having this conversation.
Yeah. We can't just shy away from it because it's uncomfortable.
Right.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand and hope it goes away.
Right.
Because the reality is pornography is a part of our culture. It's readily accessible.
Yeah, especially for young people.
Especially for young people, yeah. So the question becomes, what do we do about it?
Right.
Yeah.
What can we do? Like, how do we even begin to tackle something that feels this big and complex and sensitive?
Well, I really think it starts with education. And not just, sex ed in the traditional sense, like, the biology of it all.
Right.
But really talking about, the emotional and the social aspects of relationships, talking about consent.
Right.
Digital literacy, really giving young people the tools that they need to navigate this landscape.
Right, because it's not about like trying to shield them from it completely.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools to make their own decisions.
Exactly. It's about empowering them.
Right.
To be critical thinkers, to be discerning.
So instead of just saying, don't watch this.
Right.
It's having those conversations about the risks.
Right.
About about the potential impact.
But also about healthy sexuality, healthy
Yeah.
relationships,
Right.
about respect.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've thrown a lot at you in this deep dive, but hopefully it's given you some things to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And remember, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
So the more you understand about this issue, about the potential impact,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions, for yourself, for the young people in your life.
And to have those conversations
Exactly.
with the young people in your life.
Yeah.
So as you continue to kind of explore this topic and think about all of this, here's a final thought for you. How can we create a culture where young people they feel safe talking about this stuff
Yeah.
openly, honestly, without shame, without judgment?
Right.
Because ultimately that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's about fostering their well-being.
Absolutely.
It's about empowering them
Yeah.
to navigate all of the complexities of life and relationships
Right.
in a healthy way.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. Thank you.
Until next time.